Well, good morning, everyone. And it's great to see many familiar faces and also new faces. So as Doug mentioned, there's been a lot of things that have been going on over the last year. And while it feels it's been a really long time, it also has been a very short time. But one thing I'd say right off the bat is everyone's having, I would say, the best time of their lives within Remsoft. We're really having fun. We have a vision in terms of what we want to accomplish over the coming years. But at the same time, we haven't lost track of who we are as a company from a cultural point of view. Now, that's not to say there's not any speed bumps, but at the end of the day, I can confidently say with everyone that I'm collaborating with, we do generally get along most days. We do laugh way more than we probably should. But at the same time, we are very focused on execution in terms of what we want to achieve going forward. So I was asked to in my role as CEO to share with you the Remsoft vision, where we're going. And as a tech founder, I immediately gravitated towards the technology side, but the team said, no, you need to give some context in terms of what's driving some of our thinking. And then Doug and I were chatting, and then it was like, wait, I thought, Doug, you were going to be doing this part. He's like, oh, no, you're going to do that part. And we started giggling and laughing. And as I said, we have fun. We figure it out as we go. The other thing I've realized as I've gotten older is I'm probably going blind or something, but I can't see show notes as well as I can usually see. So today I was like, can you make these things really, really big, since I don't want to use my phone and walk around with that and diminish the personal aspect of this. So I'm going to spend probably about 45 minutes with you this morning and just kind of walk you through some of the current thinking. I'm hoping that by the end of it that you'll be excited, you'll feel inspired. We'll have 2 days together where you can interact with Team Remsoft. As Doug had mentioned, there's a large contingent here, and that will never change. We always want to make sure that we're available and accessible to you in terms of having conversations with you, breaking bread together, and maybe having a few soda pops. So I wanted to start things off in terms of sharing with you maybe things we think about at Remsoft. So even though it says three forces there, really, I made Holly kind of add a fourth one there as a segue there. But we'll talk about some of the things that are influencing how we think about the short term, the medium term, as well as the actual long term. And truthfully, some of the things I'll share with you is not going to be anything new to you. You are foresters. You're working the global markets. You understand better than anyone else some of the pain points and the opportunities that we face. So let's hop into it. And right off the bat, one of the things that we do think about quite frequently is just the climate-driven disruption. So again, aside from what your climate beliefs are, I would suggest or propose that over the last few years, we've all witnessed and experienced more extreme weather events through time, and those have impacts. And specifically in the context of wildfire and forest loss, we've been setting records beyond what we've seen since 2020 for that matter. So we'll dive into that and see what that means in terms of how Remsoft thinks on a go-forward basis. The other aspect would be around regulatory pressures, and really this is around the European deforestation regulation. There's other legislative regulatory frameworks coming online around the world that are ultimately going to impact us, you, and one might argue that digital compliance is going to become mandatory versus optional, and there's a global shift towards more transparency around that supply chain. And I don't think this would, again, be any news to any of you around the table. Market volatility and supply tightening. So as you look at global markets, we only need to mention the word tariffs, and that would probably evoke different emotions, again, softwood lumber, et cetera, et cetera. But even going beyond that in terms of structural demand versus supply, again, depending which statistics you're looking at, there are trends that are showing that demand is going to outpace what is going to be available from a supply point of view. So how do we capitalize on those opportunities, or how do we address some of those challenges? And then lastly, as we think about digitization, automation, and the rise of AI in forestry, this is an area where we'll spend probably quite a bit of time in terms of sharing some of our thinking around this space. And if I do this properly, hopefully, then it'll set the stage for Grant, our VP of Product, to introduce you all to the current portfolio of Remsoft solutions and products, and then where we're actually going. And if we both do this well, then it'll position Parag Srivastava, the Chief Technology Officer, to explain to you how we're actually going to do this. So again, that focus on the what and the why, and then how we actually go about executing and delivering for you. So let's dive into some of the global trends or drivers that we're thinking about. So again, there's various statistics that you can draw upon, but when we think about wildfire destruction, it's doubled when we think about the last 20 years, with 2024 being the most extreme fire year on record. And really that translates to 135,000 square kilometers burned. And when I think about this, my wife's from Saskatchewan, so for those who are not from Canada, it's the prairie provinces, kind of smack in the middle, flat as a pancake, agriculture in the middle, but you go up north and you hit the boreal forest. And we've gone, and last summer, forest fires all over. And depending on which way the winds were going, either you can see 8 feet in front of you or you couldn't. It either smelled great, you're on lake vacation, or it totally stunk of fire. And this is something that when you talk and go through these oral stories with different people, whether the grandmas or the great grandmas or whatnot, they're like, we've never seen this in our lifetime. So when we think about that, since 2020, 4 of the 5 worst wildfire years have occurred since 2020. And again, in forestry, we understand these have impacts. It impacts our plans. It impacts things as our operations unfold. It changes everything. And again, depending which statistic you want to draw upon, if these extreme weather events are happening, if climate is accelerating these negative changes, then we are probably going to see further drought impacts as well as pests coming in and creating more challenges for us. Workforce now are potentially looking more as carbon sources versus sinks. So what's the impact of this? Ultimately, we can expect higher volatility in supply, greater operational risk as we execute, maybe more frequent emergency replanning, so replanning the plan of the plan. Insurance costs, again, it's not just forestry, as we look in other sectors in Florida and housing as an example, very difficult to insure. And then increasing scrutiny on forest resilient investments. So this aspect of climate, I would say, is something that we can ignore, but at the end of the day, in terms of extreme weather events, we are all going to feel that in terms of our day-to-day work there. A couple statistics on the side there, but you've already scanned through them. So one thing I would suggest, or the way Remsoft thinks about things, is that we need to shift away from one where we're purely reactive, one where wildfires, climate-driven forest loss is accelerating at a record pace. We need to move from reactive firefighting to one where we're proactive and really focus on data-driven forest resilience. And how do we do that? Well, we do that by leveraging advanced analytics, scenario modeling for those who are Woodstock users, doing more of that work, and real-time monitoring to protect assets. And I know when I mention real-time, that means different things to different people. Is that like instantaneous? Is that 1 hour? Is that a day? Again, it depends on your definition there. But certainly in terms of the technology that's available today, we can accommodate that, or I believe that we can. And then we want to optimize our interventions, and ultimately with the goal of keeping our forest standing for their intended purposes. And this is another aspect when I think about things as I go through my newswire. David Suzuki, for those in Canada, you'll know the name. For those that are from outside Canada, environmental activist his entire life, spoke about climate change, environmental impacts and whatnot. Well, he was in the news and he's 90 years old. And really from his point of view, what he spent his life advocating for was, from a science point of view, there were, I believe, 7 tipping points that we really shouldn't be crossing. And largely we've crossed many of them. And his whole argument today, as he says he talks to his grandchildren, is it's more about local resiliency, local communities becoming resilient and being prepared. We're at that stage. And again, I'm not here to preach around climate and whatnot, as opposed to saying, if these things are true, irrespective of your climate belief, how do we position ourselves to be resilient at that local level, that regional level? And Remsoft is here to help you with that, with the technology that we're actually building. So regulatory shockwave, as we think about that, again, this is largely driven by the EUDR, European Deforestation Regulation. Again, this is one where we can say we've been kicking the can down the line forever, delays and delays, and the politics of the European Commission, and et cetera, et cetera. But ultimately, we could also argue that this is inevitable. It is coming. We won't go down the road of saying, well, other certifications, if you're SSC certified, why do we need to do this? Is another tax on a tax, whatever that is. But at the end of the day, when we think about the impacts of these things, are companies ready today? Some statistics show that only 30% of companies are in fact ready for the EUDR, and the consequences can be significant. That if you are not, you have up to 4% of your previous year's revenue, at a minimum 4% in terms of penalty going forward. So there can be impacts that are significant. So when we think about this, the regulatory shockwave, and again, in Canada, there's different frameworks, the Forest Sector Transformation Task Force of 2026. Again, as you go across the different geographies, as we look forward, there is going to be more, we believe, pressures. And this is where compliance reporting, making things easy for you all, is going to become even more important. So when we think about impacts of regulatory shockwaves, we believe mandatory digital compliance will come. It's really not going to be an option. There's going to be obviously an increase in data requirements. So if we're still living in this world of siloed data, this needs to be resolved. Otherwise, we will never be able to achieve these types of objectives that we have. There's going to be more operational burden on exporters. So how can Remsoft help those folks in terms of their obligations? Obviously, there's going to be tighter scrutiny around sourcing. And then at the end of the day, we're shifting towards more transparency in that supply chain. And so this opaque forestry value chain is no longer really going to be accepted as we go forward. So what does that mean? How do we think about that at Remsoft? Well, if regulators are going to be demanding plot level GPS traceability, even physical segregation in some cases, as we're moving some of these goods, segregated in terms of those that are compliant or not, and then having audible due diligence, we need to help our forest owners, managers shift in terms of how they're managing their data, how they're doing their business. But it does also invoke the concept of digital assets and digital twins. And immediately I know when I say digital twins, some in the group are going to go, okay, we've heard this language, this jargon before, and I'll touch more about our thoughts at Remsoft on that. But ultimately, how do we address this? We need to increase the use of geospatial analytics. And again, thank you to our Esri Inc. partners here. Long-standing history with Esri, so they will be key to this. Inventory, integrated inventory and harvest planning, and supply chain traceability platforms that really can prove where the origin, the provenance of various loads. And so there is a cost of compliance, but we're hoping with the Remsoft platform, the Forest Intelligence platform, that we'll be able to make that much more easier and streamlined for you. Another trend there is just market volatility. So as we, again, depending which statistics you want to draw upon from which geography you're actually in, if we look at North America, wood product demand is forecasted to stabilize in 26, but we're still seeing mill closures in BC and the US Southeast. With the remove about 1.3 billion board feet of softwood capacity. So there's going to be tightening supply, and this is going to pressure prices. On top of that, we anticipate global sawmilling facing more log shortages, whether beetle kill, conservation constraints, sanctions on Russian logs, or plantation shifts, whether that be radiata pine to eucalyptus in South America. But at the end of the day, what are the impacts here? It's probably going to be, or not probably, it will be higher delivered wood costs, supply insecurity, pressure on inventory, and logistics planning. And ultimately, it's going to highlight the need and the importance of forecasting and multi-sourcing. So as we look at this, as we go forward, some might use a language that price is no longer a bug, but it's actually a feature. And how can we leverage that as a feature in the Remsoft Forest Intelligence platform so that you can actually take advantage or maximize the opportunities that come with that? So as we think about this, one thing that I would impart to you is that we need to think about force intelligence as no longer being optional as opposed to a core asset. And again, these are words, big words, some might say fluffy words, but at the same time, one of the things I really want to impart to this group is that I do believe that some of the things that we think about really are inevitable. Like whether you believe in this, whether you think AI is going to replace every single human in the world. Again, we can have debates about that. But at the end of the day, there are shifts, tectonic shifts that are happening right now across mainstream technology, across different verticals of specialization, that it's clear that these shifts are going to happen and in the near future. But at the end of the day, when we think about this, how do we actually take advantage of this? Well, we're going to focus on using more advanced inventory. So again, at Remsoft, we have a history of working with LiDAR, enhanced forest inventories, increasing the use of growth and yield modeling. Thank you. They're increasing the font size on the notes here so this guy can actually see. And then leveraging market link planning tools to lock in future fiber, stress test scenarios, and turn volatility into a planning advantage. So that's something, again, I want to impart to you is, yes, there's headwinds, yes, there's speed bumps and whatnot, but how can Remsoft help you take advantage of those and flip those from challenges to opportunities? And we have lots of ideas on how we can do that. And over the 2 days, we'll show you some of that thinking. So this was trend number 4, but really it's a segue into things we're going to be talking about over the next 2 days. I know the screen flickers here. I'm not sure if that's intentional to tell me to pick up the pace or not, but I'll ignore you for now unless you tell me to go faster. But at the end of the day, I think everyone in the room would agree that this digitalization, automation, and the rise of AI in forestry operations is something that's not changing. It's maybe something we've all been leading up to over the last decade or 2 decades going forward. And really, when we think about this aspect, again, you can bring up whatever data points you want, but in some cases, we think about digital forestry adoption. Some would argue that it's surpassed 60% globally. Now, there's always going to be people with head in their sand, head in the sand, right? Not believing that this, the art of the possible can actually be realized. But I would certainly challenge that thinking today. And for those who have known me for 2 decades, 3 decades, certainly at times myself seen as a heretic in terms of some of the ideas that I believe could come to fruition. A lot of them have come forward. So that art of the possible is important. But when we think about aging workforces, when we think about the level of manual processes still in place in some of the work we do, there is still a lot of room for improvement. And so as we also look forward, companies, as the ones we talk to, are hot and heavy on AI. And that should be no surprise, and we'll delve more into what that actually means for us. And that's AI applied across the entire forestry value chain. So just as an interesting poll, how many folks in the room have played with OpenClaw? 1, 2, it's the usual people that I anticipate. So for those who have not, OpenClaw has gone viral. It's a autonomous AI agent platform that you can leverage. It's literally gone viral. So if you're thinking of San Francisco, other areas, GitHub number of stars, et cetera, it's gone off the chart. Very, very, very cool stuff. And the reason I mention that is the pace that AI is moving, as you all know, is at warp speed. Think of Remsoft as your forestry AI technology provider, your trusted partner, but with deep, deep vertical expertise in forestry. We want to be here for you as you're going through this journey to bring our expertise and our knowledge in AI to help you make the correct decisions going forward. And again, Parag Shrivastava, our CTO, will talk about some of these aspects as we go forward. So certainly there'll be an acceleration, a shift from manual to digital operations. Improved planning and logistical performance, higher CapEx on tech-enabled systems, and widening performance gaps between digital leaders and laggards. So I would argue, you being here by default, you are not a laggard, you're an industry leader. And knowing many of you around the room, I would say without reservation, yes, your signal to us, Remsoft as a company, by being present means you're open to these conversations, and we're hoping to unlock value for you as we go forward. So let's talk about Remsoft technology. So those are kind of the 4 global industry trends, if you will, drivers that we think about. And I'm sure there's others from your seat that you're thinking, yeah, these might make sense. But at the same time, I would suggest that there's nothing in those drivers that are probably a surprise to you in the seats that you sit. So let me shift gears and share with you a little bit about Remsoft's thinking around technology. And again, as a technology founder, I've also been told over the years that, hey, we'll let you out of the room by yourself sometimes, but most of the times we'll pair you with bigger brains, younger brains, et cetera, that can explain this better. So you don't get us in trouble. But at the very least, right now, I own the stage, so I'll see what trouble I can get Remsoft into in terms of commitments around technology. So let's talk about digitalization, et cetera, as we go forward. But why digitalization now? As I said, there's a labor shortage. I think most people agree as we look across the landscape that finding people to replace an aging workforce has been a challenge, continues to be a challenge. So we kind of don't have a choice to embrace. We don't have a choice. We need to embrace technology as we go forward. And an interesting fun fact as we look, and again, and this is in Canadian context, but I'll extrapolate shortly to developed world versus developing nations. But since Confederation in Canada, and that being in 1867, and thankfully I have the show notes there to tell me, which spans a period of 159 years, this is the first time we actually had a population decrease. And so this, while it may sound very insignificant, Canada is a country where we've relied on immigration to go forward. And this can be explained. We knew we were adjusting government policies. But when we think about the challenges in forestry and an aging workspace, and you have a population at the macro level that is actually diminishing, not growing, young people who want to come to urban environments versus staying in rural environments where a lot of forestry work business is done, it's going to create further pressures as we go forward. And this pattern is consistent across developed countries. You look at Japan, even the US, it's an aging workforce. And then when you look at the developing nations, yes, it's a younger workforce that isn't growing, but in fact, the pressures then are different in the sense of how they are negatively putting pressure on forests through overexploitation and land conversion. So this was an interesting fun fact there in terms of you really don't have a choice. We need to accelerate and embrace these technologies. We've talked about climate, wildfire, supply chain volatility already driving real-time decisions. So again, the key point here is we want to make sure these things we've heard about connectedness or the connected force or whatever that is, over the next 12 to 18 months, we're going to put that bed to rest in terms of, is that the right saying? Again, for those who know me, I make up sayings as we go that make sense to me and then don't make sense in hindsight. But we're going to put that topic to rest in terms of showing you how we're actually going to do that with the Remsoft Forest Intelligence platform. And really the idea here is your data is going to flow seamlessly. You're still going to be the customers of your data, but as a system of action, we're going to enable all sorts of really neat use cases. The other aspect is to think about is digitally native tools have really reached a point of maturity. So again, over the last decades, having worked with many in the room, I still remember conversations with some of you back in the day, which was, are we going to use an iPad or are we going to use an Android? And then today it's probably who the hell cares? Just pick one and then go to Best Buy or whatever store if it conks out and grab another one. But honestly, back then it was like, oh, the sun might be too bright and it'll overheat the tablet. I know some of you are grinning and I'm not picking on you. As opposed to that was some of the conversations back there and things have changed. But that work had to be done. But certainly those tools have evolved to a point where when we think about maturity from sensors, connectivity, we only need to think about Starlink, what Elon's done there, things have changed, edge compute, et cetera. And so when we think to our friends from Esri back in the day, we would say build your applications assuming that you would be in a disconnected environment. And today I would argue, throw that out to lunch, whatever the saying is there, assume that you're always going to be connected. Certainly we're trending to that world where everything is going to be connected to the internet without a single question about that. And then most of you probably on a daily basis now embrace AI copilots in terms of whatever your flavor is, Gemini, Claude, Copilot, whatever it is, everyone probably uses it. But I would argue you're maybe not using it to the fullest potential that you can leverage some of these things going forward. Okay, so one of the things I thought really interesting to maybe provide context in how we think at Remsoft about the world in the short term and the near term. So when we think about big data, again, drawing you back in the journey, remember big data, 2010s, ooh, it's the new thing. It's either characterized by 3 Vs or 4 Vs. So, high volumes of data, high variety of data, high velocity of the data. And if you really subscribed as a purist, then the fourth one would be the veracity or the truthfulness of the data. So this is either generating memories for you or you're like shaking, going, I don't want to talk about the big data era anymore. But really this is about collecting massive data sets. Think about NAPE imagery programs, large airborne LiDAR data programs. It was like, how do we storage? How do we manage all this stuff? It's like, it's so big. The rise of cloud. You remember the saying, if you don't go to the cloud as a business, you're going to die. And then now it's kind of more of a, well, you're probably better off as being a hybrid on-prem cloud aspect. But there's been a lot of work done here in the big data side. And certainly as we think about previous work, as we think about Esri GIS or GIS in general, ArcMap to ArcPro, ArcGIS Enterprise, there's a shift in terms of talking about data and how do you structure that data? How do you centralize it? How do you make it ready for the enterprise level as we go forward? And then at the end of the day, ERPs, enterprise GIS systems, supply chains are talked about. But what we would argue is really it was about digitizing data in that big data area. Now, also in forestry, I would argue we're always lagging mainstream things by maybe 3 years to 5 years as we go forward. So certainly some of the things that are happening on mainstream in terms of Silicon Valley, et cetera, I don't think we need to rush there quite yet. Forestry is not, bleeding edge technology. Let other people pound sand, bang their heads against the wall, and we'll take those lessons learned and accelerate. But I would argue the first wave is around digitizing the data. And where we are, and when we think about AI and things that we're doing now, I would say what's transformative or why we're at this inflection point is really we're talking about digitizing the work itself. And so I want you to hold that thread as I continue on around the work aspect. So let me walk you through that concept through the forestry value chain. And really, I'm not going to say, this is what Remsoft's doing. Again, Grant and Prague will come up later and talk about the what and the why and the how. But in terms of the different phases of the forestry value chain, one of the things that I really think about is where do you have friction? And when I talk about friction, it's really where do we see bottlenecks? Generally, is it people, is it technology and whatnot? But if I walk you through this journey and say, all right, for forest inventory, from the Remsoft point of view, historically, it's been manual, expensive, weeks and months to update as an inventory. You all know this. Highly technical skills required. Fragmented data source. Are you using Sentinel data? Are you using LiDAR data? Are you using your own drone data? Like God knows you had in your plots. Are you using FIA plots? It's like, oh my God, it becomes a mess. But the ability to continually monitor things wasn't really possible, I would say, until today. And so now when we think about things, how many of you all have drones? How many of you go out to the bush and just launch this thing and collect data, and right away, by the time you're back in the office, it's already done the image analysis using AI technologies, segmented the stands, extracted the individual trees, identified qualified health on some of them. Costs have come down, et cetera, et cetera. So the idea here is that this is a phase that has been historically digitizing very, very quickly and will continue to do so at the global level. And at the end of the day, I would say we are closer to this digital twin concept, or taking forest assets and converting them as digital twins, than ever before. If we look at harvest operations in terms of friction, and I will connect the dots on why I'm so fixated on friction of late, the real-time visiting and production has been historically poor. I think everyone would agree. It's like when operations are unfolding, often we don't have that FedEx ability to really look into the different phases and get lots of information. When we think about harvester head data, that's still an unused, maximized data set, unless you're in the Nordic, Scandinavia area where there's different opportunities there. But how do we leverage that? We're really not. And then when you add in safety and terrain complexity, I know in past conversations with you, some of the value was really around safety versus some of the obvious ones that we might think about from day-to-day forestry business. So as we look at digitization accelerating, telematics is standardizing across OEMs. There is certainly, you may not see it now, and in some cases you may, but that shift from manual to assisted operations towards semi-autonomous to fully autonomous across that actual machine landscape, the OEM landscape, that is coming, but I also believe we're still many moons or many years away out from that. Machine vision with AI, et cetera, these are all technologies that you've seen through the various conferences you've gone to, different things. Different opportunities. You've had the video where someone scans it with their GoPro or whatever camera system, and boom, the trees come out. Whether they meet your accuracy and specification requirements is a different story. And then how do you actually bring in predictive maintenance driven by sensor data? So Remsoft has technologies already through acquisition, through its proper portfolio that Grant will talk about, that does things in this space already around telematics versus maintenance, repair, and operations, and so forth. But at the end of the day, harvest automation is exploding. Taking OEM equipment, augmenting it with LiDAR sensors, et cetera, this is kind of becoming the norm in terms of how do we move to that pilot-assisted mode. When we think about transportation and logistics, high cost center, dynamic constraints, so weather's always changing, road closures, load restrictions, mill quotas, everything's always changing. Coordination has historically been done by phone, audio, spreadsheets. Supply-demand balancing changes daily, and then I believe we'll have some speakers later today that will talk about some of these challenges as we go forward, and little to no real-time optimization. So something that you'll see more from Remsoft is, again, a rich history in terms of wood stock and optimization capabilities, but how can you actually offer this as a service? How could we potentially run point optimization, so really lightweight models, but have maybe services or agents call these as you require for the task at hand? You'll see us start introducing some of those technologies. But I would argue that logistics is currently the fastest moving automation frontier in forestry today because of the high costs related to this particular phase of the forestry value chain. And then lastly, when we think about mill and compliance, this is an area downstream, right? Often disconnected. The ERPs, the mill systems are not connected upstream to the harvest forest operations data, so there's a disconnect. Manual reconciliation of loads. I'm still shocked, in some geographies I go to and you show me your paper ticket stack and I'm like, this is just crazy. But at the end of the day, when we think about compliance or certifications and the need for auditable trails, this is an area that we can really move the yardstick forward in terms of helping organizations just do business a lot more easier as we go forward. And truthfully, when we think about blockchain technology and AI agents, this is an area where I would suggest from a friction point of view, they can really transform this space for you. Now, why am I so fixated on friction? I would argue to you, based on mainstream in terms of conversations, AI is going to take away all our jobs. If the friction is intelligence, i.e. the human, the thinking, etc., then yes, I believe AI will eat your lunch and take that over. And if the friction is not intelligence, then I would argue, no, we're good. And so what do I mean by that? I really mean that in the sense of if you're thinking about maybe a mill, paper mill with a piece of equipment already rigged out with 150 sensors on it, collecting data all the time, that environment is not going to change. The constraint there, the friction is engineers, their brain power in terms of interpreting that data to make recommendations back to you in terms of where there might be some problems. That is a space that I believe AI agents ripe to digitally transform. So I drove my Tesla up, my Model Y, again, back in the day when Elon was, I'm not using LiDAR on my cars. And people are like, why would you not use LiDAR on the cars? We also don't want to enter a world where your AI is driven purely by a set of rule heuristics, because then it's going to be constrained by the test data available. And so he didn't use LiDAR because he says, when you drive a car, do you have a LiDAR on your forehead beaming around, doing range? No, you have eyeballs. We do depth perception. We reason. And so part of the thinking there was that the engines they were building, and this is FSD, full self-driving, was to build something that was not purely based on heuristics, that it could actually reason. So if you approach a construction zone in any single country, you can figure out what this meant or whatever this meant, whether you should proceed going forward. But the reason I tell that story is when we think about robotics and AI, there is a robotics constraint ratio. And really, it's a simple equation of E over V, where E is the environmental complexity or the variety of the environment, and V is the agent's variety, its ability to problem solve or reason. And where these are successful is when you drive that real world number close to zero. And so if you are over one, that robot, that AI is going to fail. Well, the reason I tell that story is when you think about forestry, you go out to an operation site and you got a buncher, then suddenly some endangered species flew in, guess what? Operations halt, everything's changed, etc. The variety in the physical world, the environment for us is so complex, I'd argue, that the agent's level of capability, capacity, reasoning ability has to be so high to make this tenable as a space that it can actually solve. So even when we think about certain companies out there trying to do semi-autonomous skidding, it's not an easy thing. And thinking of Tesla, again, I'm not a Tesla bro, et cetera. I don't have stickers on my car either, as opposed to how much money have they spent over how many years to get to a point where we're close to FSD. Now, this is a side debate. If you really want to irk our CTO, just offer Parag a ride in a Tesla in full self-driving mode. He'll start screaming and crying and say, no, I don't trust this thing. He's already laughing back there. But this is something I would impart to you to think about, is that yes, there is room for AI to disrupt. And let's be specific. We're talking about generative AI. We're talking about agentic AI. We're not talking about machine learning, deep learning, things that have existed in the past. But bring this friction concept in to localize what AI actually means for you. So the other aspect when we think about Remsoft technology is around geolocation. So I've always said, I challenge you to give me a piece of data that's void of geography. Everything data is related to a patch of dirt or a piece of ground on this planet. So one thing to think about is that every stick, we're going to need to know where it came from, where it is now, and how it got there. So when we think about Remsoft technology and the acquisition of Logger and chain of custody of multi-party systems, this is really to address the rising global ESG and compliance expectations that we know are coming. We also know that you feel growing consumer investor demand for verified low carbon materials. And we also know that there's pressure on large forest asset owners and manufacturers to verify origin, legality, and chain of custody. So we need more certainty as we think about these forestry value chains where there's multiple parties and actors at play. And Remsoft technology is well suited for that. And I hope over the 2 days you'll leave going like, yes, absolutely it will. And on top of that, the digital maturity of remote sensing, when we think about satellite and geospatial infrastructure, really does allow us and enable real-time verification as we go forward, which is something that wasn't possible here to date. So when we think about traceability, how we trace that back to the forestry value chain at the high level across those various aspects, at the nursery level, geotag seed sources, digital seed batch tracking and allocation. So when we think about Remsoft FMS technology around Stratus, around in-floor FMS, and for the audience, know One is not going away. This is really about bringing the best in class, best in breed technology. So whether you're ready today for certain types of enterprise capabilities or not, the idea here is it's not one or the other. We're bringing this technology together. And certainly when we think about inventory, this is one when we think about stand boundaries, age classes, et cetera, it's almost a no-brainer. But when we get to the harvest side, machine level geotagging. So this is something Doug mentioned in terms of Remsoft now with the forest machine connectivity with CAN4 and Mosaic. Being able to track every piece of iron out there and knowing the performance and productivity of those pieces of equipment, being able to move from all the way up to roadside, understanding what that looks like, stump to roadside, and then tying that into the logistics side of having everything time-stamped and geolocated and really having those digital chain of custody handoffs. So as these loads are moving across the network, being able to trace them and understand them. And again, Alpaca Ray will talk more about that. They've been using some scale pass load slip technology of Remsoft. And again, the idea here is not we're getting rid of one or the other as opposed to we're bringing it together into the transportation and logistics solution space to give you multiple options in terms of the features that you need. And then we think about mill just around the provenance of verified input, et cetera, downstream, closing the gate here. We're going to have traceable SKUs, outputs for customers as we go forward. So as we think about what is the new standard around end-to-end traceability, or how does Remsoft think about it as we go forward, it could look like a single digital identity for each stand and each load. As I talked about already, geolocation, the geography of data, that's going to be baked into the Remsoft platform without any question. Automated digital chain of custody, Grant, I'm sure we'll talk about that, multi-parties, multi-actors, how we can work with that. And of course, that immutable audit trail as we think about SFC, FSC, SFI, PEFC, et cetera, whatever certifications. And then we think about carbon accounting, being able to tie that back to an actual location as we look forward. It's kind of like my screen kind of flashes every 2 seconds, so good thing I'm not going crazy here. But in terms of benefits, one I would say is massive reduction in compliance risk. So I always joke with many of you when I talk with you, it's like, hey, as foresters, we already have 7 hats. We got a job, we wear 7 hats. And hey, guess what? We want to do this new thing. Here's an 8th hat, then a 9th hat. We really want to say, hey, let's take away some of those hats from you. So when we think about compliance or any type of reporting, how can we actually do that for you? How can we make faster audits for you? Simplify reporting, just kind of make that easy for you going forward. How do we provide more confidence to your insurers, your investors that are reporting more real-time access to the data through your smartphone? And then how do we provide better optimization decisions when we have this wealth of now accurate, time-stamped, geolocated, real-time data going forward? So when we think about technology and how this enables it, again, within the Remsoft platform, for those who have seen previous presentations through Remsoft, we do have an ecosystem area where we do want partners to be able to come in and contribute. So it's not that we have to own everything. So as an example, the best one is if you're a curated content provider, like a Planet or a Maxar or Earth Daily Analytics, we want you part of our platform ecosystem where you can deliver through our platform these types of curated data sets and potentially tie into some agentic AI work to make it all sing. And more examples will come through that over the 2 days. But other aspects of IoT technologies, global GNSS, global navigation, satellite systems and stuff, this discussion around sub-meter positioning, like that's done over the last couple of decades. We'll be fine on that. When we think about how do we track loads, logs, and stands with digital ID systems, that again, has passed. I would not say many have adopted blockchain technology fully yet, and I'll have a couple comments on that. But we're also seeing more and more AI anomaly detection. So again, when we think about some of these curated content data sets from these satellite imaging providers, they will provide you value-added products that are already flagged and identify problem areas, whether that's illegal harvesting or route deviations, et cetera, to drive other things within your system of action. So one thing I'll also kind of share with you in terms of our thinking as we think about remote sensing, LiDAR, environmental monitoring for real-time risk management, this has been work that's been happening for a really, really long time. So around digital assets and digital twins. So I'm not going to read you through each block. You can scan through there. But the idea here is that from seedling to mill, remote sensing now really delivers for us continuous visibility. So again, Remsoft will have that partner ecosystem that other players that are focusing on different aspects can come in and contribute to the platform and the community, which would be you, our customers. And certainly when we think about LiDAR and satellite, IoT sensors, et cetera, yes, we want that data coming into our platform. We want to leverage that with Remsoft technology to enable predictive, not reactive forest management as we go forward. And the thing I'd want you to take away maybe from this thought of this digital twin is that these technologies really are forming that data backbone for a world driven by semi-autonomous forestry. It's something that's happening almost as an undercurrent. It's not talked about. It's a hard problem, partially why I think people really aren't talking about it. Just based on past experiences, it's not something that's going to happen overnight, but there's a lot of work that's actually happening behind the scenes, and these are technologies that are driving there. And then the next step would be full autonomy, which would be AI driven, of course. So when we think about AI, we can spend forever talking about it. And again, we got 2 days together. You can come, pull myself, any of the Remsoft leaders, any of the Remsoft staff, employees, other thought leaders here that have joined us. But forestry, you can argue, is AI is perfect for the forestry industry. When we think about chronic labor shortages, again, when we think about work that can be automated or codified, this is a great opportunity to leverage AI technology as we go. I have no idea what that says. Got it. Perfect. Thank you. Again, getting old, can't see half the things in front of me, but as we go forward. So the other aspect is I'll challenge your thinking and saying, is AI perfect for the forestry industry? And so the other aspect is when we think about repetitive planning tasks, I would argue yes. But I would give you a caveat on that. And mostly because today, if you followed mainstream news, a couple of weeks ago, Citrini Research published this futuristic blog on a dystopian future 2 years out, which basically AI ate all enterprise SaaS lunch, and the markets tanked big time. And then everybody got nervous on saying, well, is vertical SaaS even going to exist? Yes, it's going to continue to exist. And the part that I believe people miss was that, yes, AI has benefits, but it's going to automate and take over various tasks of various professions. And so I flash up when we think about the forester, what is the job? The job has purpose, and the purpose also is paired with various tasks that you have to do. Here's some example tasks that all of you will recognize. As we look forward in time, yes, can agentic AI do some of these tasks for you? Yes, our platform is going to enable that for you as we look forward over the next 18, 24-month period. But what AI is not going to replace is the purpose of the forester. So when you look at the purpose there, it's like, how are you going to ascribe social license to an AI agent? How are you going to send an AI agent to jail? It's like, oh, I'm sorry, the AI model waiting said that we should take this action. It was the wrong action. So it's like, well, no, someone else is still going to go to jail. So the reason I use these examples is because it's in the context of the purpose of the forester versus the tasks that they're involved with. We really need to segment them. And so this is where agentic AI, advanced AI is going to benefit our community. And Remsoft is, as I said, think of us as your AI partner with deep vertical forestry expertise. We're going to help you with that journey. And you'll see some of these examples even at this conference over the next 2 days. And then we think about multi-party coordination. AI is fantastic for this as we look forward in terms of what we want to do. And so when we think about AI, it's like many of you use Copilot, again, Gemini, Claude, whatever your flavor is, whether you use Claude Code, Claude Work, et cetera. Anthropic's hot, not because they got in a debate with the Department of War, but some of these Copilots are probably going to become your colleagues through time. And so what I really mean by that is you can expect some AI employees, and Remsoft is probably going to introduce some AI employees. So when we think about Web 3.0, this is really about decentralization. This is really driven initially by blockchain technology. It was really the read, write, own era. So if you're someone big in crypto, you can have your own Ethereum address and transact on that. I wouldn't say that this has kind of realized the fruition, the dream that it had. But believe it or not, Web 4.0 is a story that is being talked about right now. What it is, what it's going to look like, is being shaped by various people in various rooms. But the idea here between Web 4.0 is it's AI agents that will act. And so again, the emphasis here is moving towards that agentic AI and saying, hey, it's not some of the other AI that has existed forever. If you're in the process automation space, they want the word AI to die because they've been doing machine learning and deep learning for 25 years. But the generative AI is something novel. The agentic AI is something novel. And again, just to level set, because I know Parag will make sure that I do this, it's not the AI agents that are just running workflows. These are ones that operate autonomously, have reasoning capabilities. You're going to give it goals. You're going to give it outcomes that you want to realize. And aside from that, you're going to get out of the way, whether it's going to use MCP or whatever technology to realize the outcomes. It is something different, and it's focused around that digitization of work, that theme I introduced to you earlier that I wanted you to think about. So what can an AI employee do? There's a couple different things here. Again, went from that task lens, that we do on a repetitive basis. We may not need to do that anymore, but it doesn't negate the purpose of why we have foresters today. What are two examples of possible AI employees? Harvest planner, dispatcher are good examples. Imagine an AI agent that could read all sources of data, inventory, weather, equipment, telemetry, create weekly harvest plans automatically, adjust them in real time, push them out to crews with explanations. Imagine a dispatcher that can route trucks and rebalance mill allocations dynamically, something that's always watching, 24/7, nonstop. We can avoid downtime, bottlenecks. We can let it handle 90% of the dispatch exceptions automatically and only escalate those edge cases to human for intervention when they require. Imagine that. Imagine how much of your time can be freed up as we go forward. So from that point of view, who is Remsoft going forward? As we think about the near term, the medium term, and the long term, we are the intelligence layer that's going to enable better decision making. And what does that really mean? And so this is my closing slide. I can't believe I'm actually going to end on time for once in my life. But the intention here is that, as I said, think of us as your AI technology. This doesn't negate optimization technology, blockchain technology, enterprise GIS technology. Those are things that we're going to keep doing. But think of us as your AI forest technology company with deep vertical forestry expertise. So this isn't digitization for us. It isn't about going paperless or putting a GPS on a truck. Okay, it's not that. It's about creating a connected, data-rich value chain where every seedling, machine, truck, mill becomes part of this living digital system. So automation is reshaping pretty much everything as we think about it, from harvesting, logistics, and processing. Remote sensing is turning forest into digital assets, and new regulations mean traceability and geolocation are mandatory. But this is not all going to come together by itself. You need someone to bring this together. And guess what? That group, that company, that organization that's going to do that for you is Remsoft as we look forward into the future. So that's it for me. Thank you very much for your attention. Hopefully you found something insightful, useful from this. And I look forward to speaking to all of you over the next 2 days.